Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Ameen. Welcome. So this is my conversion story, how I converted to Islam. Before I begin, I just want to cover why I don't record my face instead of showing these like PowerPoint slides. And though I know people prefer a higher level of communication with that human interaction, for me it's easier to focus, and I want you to focus on what I'm saying. Now, my full story is very long and drawn out. There's a lot of small experiences and details that build up to the Shahada. Everyone has a different experience, so I'm going to focus on a couple of key periods of my life that led up to my Shahada. Now, my story begins at a very young age. When I was about 4 or 5, I remember I had a dream. And now, in Islam, we believe that you can have true dreams. Dreams can be different things, influenced by different things. Sometimes it's just, a bunch of kind of nonsense. Sometimes it's something significant. Sometimes it's influenced by bad things, and sometimes it can also be a true dream. And these true dreams come from God and have certain kind of characteristics to them. One of those characteristics is that it's typically at the end of your sleep, or perhaps at the very beginning, but I believe it's typically at the end of your sleep. And there's a couple other signs about it, but this is one of those dreams that definitely seems to fit that definition. So in this dream, it began essentially with what seemed to be my creation, actually. Looking back, I remember like the point on which I was created in this dream. My soul was created. And I can almost, in a sense, even remember that before that I didn't even exist. And oftentimes, especially with the rise of atheism after the Enlightenment period of Europe, we tend to, I'm talking like a lot of people tend to believe that after you die, there's this infinite void of nothingness, right? I guess I've kind of experienced that, what it's like to be not created for a moment there in the dream. And it wasn't scary, actually. You tend to think of it as a scary, as something scary, the idea of like not being created. But before my creation, it actually just kind of was. It really wasn't scary. It's not something really to be afraid of. And before I was created, Allah existed, God existed, and it was kind of, in a sense, almost even peaceful. And when I was created, it's very hard to explain that feeling, that experience of what it was like. When you're talking about like the unseen world, there's a lot of things, feelings, aspects to it that we don't really have words to describe, like in English or any language. But it almost felt like I was kind of like pulled out of something. Like like pulling kind of almost like a gel or something like that out of something. Yeah, I guess that's the only way I can really explain it. And I mean, there's a lot more to it, but I really just literally cannot even put words to it, so I apologize. So I'll move on from there. After I was created, there's a couple of moments in this dream where it's almost like you have a whole life before you're born. And there's probably multiple things that happen. And I was given small snippets of what this was. And the first snippet was it seems like was my creation. And then after that, I distinctly remember looking down at the earth kind of from above. And it's not like I was necessarily, like you look up at the sky and you see, types of clouds in the sky, and I was like inside a cloud or something like that. I was part of like the unseen world, but I was looking down into what we call the Shahada, the seen world, right? There's the Shahada and the Ghaib, the world of the seen and the world of the unseen. and there's also the Malakut, and this can actually get kind of intricate. But put it simply, there's the seen world, which we live in now, and there's the unseen world, right? And I was part of this unseen world looking down at our seen world. And it was also, yes, from above, but it's not like you could look up at the sky and be like, there was Greg in the sky at, some point. And it's like, it's not necessarily like that, and it's not necessarily isn't like that either. But it's just, it's just very different. So I'm in this unseen world, I'm looking down at the earth, and I was looking down, watching like human life and activity. And it was very peculiar because it's like you don't really understand the specifics of what all they're doing, like what a car is, like what are they doing with their life, It was very peculiar and it was very interesting. I was like this entity. It's not like right now I'm looking, I have hands in front of me, I have eyes, I have a mouth, I have a brain, but rather I was like some kind of like an entity that, and then I kind of direct my vision. My vision was kind of directed down, but it's not like I necessarily like had physical eyes though. What's interesting as well, so during this experience of looking down, I remember two things I was interacting with. To my left, what felt like, I guess perhaps you could say 30 meters away or something like that, there, or maybe 15 meters away, there was another entity, just like me, another soul. And then behind me was like the person I was interacting with. Perhaps it was God, perhaps it was an angel, I'm not sure. And so to my left is this other soul, and they're also having like a conversation, and I'm over here looking down at the earth, also having a conversation with someone or something behind me. I couldn't see, and I never was able to see what was behind me, or at least remember. What's interesting, so as I'm looking down at the earth, I remember I could hear that conversation to my left. And what's interesting is like, it wasn't like in this world where you vocalize and you create vibrations in the air and they hit your eardrum and the other person's eardrum and you're kind of like interacting like that. Rather, it was very different. It was like you kind of think and you kind of can like think in a direction. And so this person over there was like, having this conversation. And if I wanted to, actually, I could turn in like even perhaps perfectly over here, that conversation. But, it just wasn't, there's no need to. It wasn't my conversation. Why would I listen to his conversation, Like there's no concept of like snooping in on a conversation. There's no concept of like poor manners even, like there's like a natural order of things. And like you just, there's no way of even fathoming to break that natural order of things, and God knows best. It's just what I can remember of this dream, It was a pretty heavy dream, and there's a lot of other parts of this dream, but I still can't remember that detailed. And so I'm looking out at the earth, and this thing behind me is, it knows I'm looking out at the earth, and interestingly enough, I think the entity to my left is having a similar conversation, and as it was also looking down at the earth, we knew that the human beings down the earth were like going through a test. It's like a phase, right? And it's like you're offered to do it yourself, right? So it's this entity behind me. If I recall correctly, it asked me some kind of a question, like, what do I think about it? I don't remember what I said. Like, looks interesting. I don't really know. Had like a childlike purity of like mind and heart as well, sort of like almost like an infant, infantile, purity of heart and stuff, and just like kind of naivete as well. And then it offered me. It was like, do you want to go down there? Do you want to do it? Do you want to weather the gauntlet? Do you want to go through the labyrinth? And I thought about it, and I knew, though, this is kind of interesting, like I knew a couple of things. One thing I knew was that it's almost like I was given an option. I could do this, I could be a human being, and in the end, the possibility of reward is unattainable without going through this. On the other hand, it's like you could skip this and perhaps become like an angel, but then there's no possibility of obtaining that great reward, which I imagine is probably heaven, right? I looked down and I thought about it, and I was like, as long as I felt like as long as in the end I make it out good, then yes, I think I want to do it. And the entity behind me was like, are you sure? Because you can't take it back once you make this decision. And I was like, I just thought about it, and I was like, yes, I want to do it, And then interestingly enough, I remember seeing like general human being life, and then I saw like a car. I remember distinctly looking at a car, and my mom was driving this car, actually. And it kept asking me again, as like, are you absolutely positive? Because you cannot take this back once you just make this decision. And I was like, I thought about it, and I was like, yes, like I really, really want it. And then and I was there, this entity up in the unseen world, looking down, and I was like, yes, like I really, really, really want it. And I was like almost childlike, like a kid in a store, like I really want it, I was like, I really, really, really want it. And then the more I thought about it, the more like I was like, it's almost like you really had to show how bad you wanted it to get it or something, or at least that's what I personally imagined in myself, perhaps at the moment. And then it kind of didn't say anything after that. I felt like kind of like energy of coming off it, like not like an aversion almost at my kind of childlike, perhaps a little bit of aversion to my childlike desire to go down and be a human, but I don't know. I mean, I can't really describe exactly what this entity behind me was thinking or feeling, but it stopped asking me at that point. I almost wonder if that was like part of my uniqueness and my serious desire to go down and be a human. And then I remember to my left, that other soul went down to the earth before me. And then in this moment, I was like, I think it was just a few moments before me, actually. And then I started moving down towards the earth, like I was being taken down there. And then I went towards this car, and then I entered the car, and then I entered the womb. And so here's the next phase. Maybe I'll move on to the next slide for that. And so I remember going down, I entered the womb, and I remember the womb was very warm. It was very smooth all around me. I felt very safe. Like I was very safe from the outside world. But as I grew in the womb, I knew that I would need to leave the womb. Though I was very scared too. There's a lot of trials in this world, and it's like, sort of like the anticipation of, like, I don't know, a job interview or something. Like, you got to do it, but you don't want to, or something like that, I do remember in the womb one memory. My mom was like angry and maybe scared once with regards to someone, and I could feel her emotions, and I felt afraid myself. I could feel like the heat, inside of her kind of heating up, and she was talking, talking in a very serious tone with someone, and I could feel that other person in the room as well. So I'm sure there's some science as well out there that, children in the womb can feel the emotions of their mother and stuff like that. And then I remember my birth, and as I was getting older, growing in the womb, I was like, oh man, the inevitable is coming, right? And I remember my birth. I actually remember the hospital room as well. I almost wish I could go and see, like, as an adult, see it again and see how close it is to that dream, but it's probably very improbable. And so I remember as I was born, I finally was like leaving, and I was like so scared to enter the world. And I remember as soon as the air hit my skin, it was like stinging pain, like 1,000 needles all over my body. It was just like this stinging pain. It was so painful, and I cried out in pain. And then, and it's interesting, I mean, there's actually a narration of this in Islam, which I remember I read this, I was just like, whoa, I was blown away. It just confirmed that dream and that experience I had, which I believe that was probably a true dream, and that actually happened. Right, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said that there's none born among the children of Adam, but Shaitan touches it. A child therefore cries loudly at the time of birth because of the touch of Shaitan, except Maryam and her child was Jesus. And then Abu Hurairah recited the verse from the Quran, and I seek refuge with you for her and for her offspring from the outcast Shaitan. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. And I remember after I was born, the nurse or caregiver took me away, and I was like, no, I didn't want to leave. My mom was the last thing I want. I just wanted to go right back to her. And the dream continued from there. And I think I had maybe 2 more memories after that before I woke up. And I remember when I was very young, I was sitting in a little caring thing, and there's other people in a room. I think it's a kitchen or dining room type of area, and there's people talking, and I wanted to talk so bad. I remember that, and I couldn't talk though because I was not even 1 year old yet. I was maybe a month or 2 old, and I just started crying. I was trying so hard to speak, but I couldn't speak, and I couldn't communicate, and I actually started crying. But yeah. And then I woke up, and I do remember actually, my head kind of hurt after that. I think I was 4 or 5 years old, and my head hurt. I was my head was kind of numb actually after that dream. I was like, whoa, what an intense dream. And actually, I still remember many aspects of that dream. Although I've probably forgotten half the dream by now, or more of it. I don't even know. But alhamdulillah, it was a very interesting dream. And this dream throughout my life, helped to guide me to God. Because there were times in my life where, things were perhaps some challenges or something, or I had doubts or this or that. And I thought back in that dream, and I was like, no, I know God exists, and I know that there's a reason I'm here. Alhamdulillah, and praises to God. And so growing up, I grew up Catholic, but I didn't really know the difference between Christian denominations, and they really weren't a big deal to me. It was just kind of like a vessel to get to God and to worship God, and I didn't know anything else. I grew up on this, I didn't know anything different. So I was very, naive and ignorant. But to me, a Christian was just a Christian. The other stuff, even if I went to, I've been to I think my grandpa took me to Lutheran church once and stuff like that. I've been to other churches, and their services were a bit different, and it really wasn't a big deal to me. A church was just a church. I guess you could say I was always kind of non-denominational, really. And my dad passed away when I was about 6, so I still don't really know him that well, really. I have some memories of him and with him, but in terms of details about him, I really don't actually know that much, even despite what my family has shared with me. But I do know that he was a Knight of Columbus, at least when he was younger. I don't know how seriously he took it as he got older. But I do know he believed in God pretty firmly. Beyond that, I'm not sure how devoted he was in terms of his Christianity. His passing away was extremely painful, especially at my age. And after that, things did get better after some months later. But after that, especially as a young child, it can kind of throw off your psyche a bit. And it can take time to, kind of recover and grow after an experience like that early on. And so in terms of my behavior, looking back, I'm pretty sure it pretty negatively influenced my behavior as a child. I probably would describe myself as a naughty kid. So then skipping ahead, then came in high school, confirmation and first communion. I believe that was around probably 9th grade. And so what's interesting about this too is it actually helped me in many respects with regards to my coming to Islam. And I'm grateful to them, for their, basic instruction. Because again, I was very naive. I hadn't even really read the Bible. I just read maybe a few verses from it, but I never actually picked up and actually read the New Testament or the Old Testament. I didn't even know much about the prophets or anything like that really. And they finally kind of just brought some really basic education, who is the Prophet Moses, this type of stuff, and that was very helpful. I think that I didn't really want to go to these confirmation classes, but I think my mom, if I recall correctly, my mom said that my dad would have wanted me to go, and so she was like trying to fulfill like what he would have wanted, I feel like, and I'm glad I did go though. I remember at one point, I think it was one of the first classes we took, we had like some kind of like a meditation session going on. I guess they were trying to like, promote a little bit of like basic spirituality within, Christianity. And at one point they actually taught us like how to basically prostrate. And we actually did like prostrate. And they're like, we're going to prostrate, we're going to pray to God. And we're going to do this for like, they set like a timer, I don't know, like 2 minutes or something. Maybe a few minutes, I don't really remember. And I remember that, it does feel like a very natural way to worship God. And then afterwards they said something, I don't remember exactly what this lady said, but she said something like, Muslims do this all the time and they spend so much time, in prostration, this and that, and like, basically telling us like, how kind of weak we are, I guess you could say. And there's a couple of other interesting experiences too with confirmation that I had. One was a very interesting story from an older lady, and I appreciate her story a lot. It helped me, expose me to the concept of like racism. And personally, I think that one of the most impactful ways of kind of educating people about racism is to tell these anecdotes, these anecdotal stories, which can be really, really impactful, and they can really illustrate, the effects of racism after the civil rights movement and in our modern era, in a way that it is very hard for anybody to really disagree with. Like, this is clear racism, you know what I mean? So personally, I think that one of the most effective ways, perhaps, God knows best, to educate people about racism, who haven't, directly experienced it, or young people and stuff like that, is through like stories of experiences of it. And so she told this story that she had adopted an African American kid, and when he grew up, he joined the U.S. Army, and on his weekends he would like get like he could walk off the base and basically like go home, because I think that he got stationed not far from home, actually, like in Louisiana or something. Maybe it was Fort Polk, I'm not sure. And on the way home, and this is probably back in like the 80s or the 70s, I don't remember, but it wasn't like that recent. It was kind of like probably 80s, 90s, 70s, somewhere around there, I'd imagine. And when he was walking home, there's this police officer who pulled up and like stops him as he's walking home. And he rolls up on him and he says, "You're speeding, boy." And he's like, "What?" "What are you talking about? You're just walking along this road home." He doesn't own a car or anything, And this police officer says like, "Well, you got to pay a speeding ticket." He's like, "You're speeding." And he was just like, I don't know what, he's just like confused, like, I don't know what this guy's talking about. And he was like, "Well, you've got to pay your speeding ticket or I'm going to take you to jail." And he actually took him to jail because he didn't have any money on it, I don't think, or whatever. He actually took him to jail, and he spent like the weekend in jail. And then, and she was like, "Where are you? Like, where were you? You said you were coming home. You didn't come home." And he was like, "I wound up in jail, actually." And they were like, "Oh, dang." And he told her his story, and she was like, "Wow." And so he had to take some of his paycheck, which I don't know, was probably a few $100s every 2 weeks. He had to make sure he was carrying, I think it was like $150 on his way home for this police officer who would pull him over as he's walking along the side of the road and make him pay this speeding ticket. Otherwise he would go to jail and he wouldn't even make it home. And I was like, wow, that was a very eye-opening story, and especially as Americans, Americans have like certain cultural sensibilities. And one of like especially in the past, 20, 30 years or so, one of those sensibilities, especially after the War on Terror, one of those sensibilities is like this very like support the troops, kind of like pro-military, don't question the troops, even if you question the war type of attitude, and that came very strong. And so especially to hear somebody who was in the military experience that. It's like, wow, this guy just seems like somebody who made like a sacrifice for his country, and yet his country treats him like this. And that was just really impactful to me. So then I remember I had a bit of a dabble with atheism in high school. If I recall correctly, I believe my brother had somehow become an atheist, and then one day he started, kind of preaching to me this atheism, and he was, making these arguments like, oh, it's just like Santa Claus, like this, like as you're growing up, people told you Santa Claus exists, but he doesn't really exist, like it was a lie. You say, oh, it's just like God, like people told you God, exists, but he doesn't really exist. And I was just like, to me, as like a young high school kid, I felt like I was having these epiphanies. I was like, whoa, I never thought all this before. These ideas I hadn't experienced before. Another thing too is that grade school, and at least in America and probably most of the rest of the world, which is modeled after a Western education system, it's very secular, and it's kind of intentionally built, at least in the Minnesota education system, is that I've noticed it's kind of intentionally built to subtly push some of that atheism on people, and sort of like Enlightenment era arguments and stuff like that, and like these like 19th century science versus religion type of arguments. I remember even in biology class seeing like this very iconic picture of like the development, the embryonic development of different animals, like human, like a turtle, and like a fish, and whatever, a lizard or something. You see the similarity, and they're trying to, and the point of that image is to refute creationism and to promote like Darwinian evolution, and it's all like once you learn a little bit more about European history and so on, this stuff all is very obvious, very obvious. Very obviously as part of an agenda, right? But when you're young, you just kind of gobble stuff up, and you don't think for yourself. You don't know what's outside the box, essentially, right? You're stuck in a box that they put you in, and they tell you what they want you to think, and you don't know anything else, right? And so as my brother was telling me these arguments and stuff, and he showed me like some website, which again brought like all these very common atheistic arguments about typically addressing Christianity. And taking some Bible verses out of context, and completely misunderstanding Bible verses, and like twisting things and stuff like that, and saying a lot of just nasty stuff about Christianity. And to me, it also seemed very convincing, like kind of logically. If you never really learned about addressing any of these issues, like in church or anything like that, it's one thing that the Catholic Church and a number of other churches haven't done a very good job of is addressing the secularism and atheism. They've tried. I remember like in confirmation and stuff like that they did try like addressing issues like certain particular issues, like kind of political issues really, but they didn't really address any ideological issues or theological issues. They never really like taught us any kind of what you would call in Arabic like aqidah, any kind of creed. Like we really didn't actually learn, like we didn't crack open the catechism of the Catholic Church and get into like creedal matters. We're not reading St. Thomas Aquinas at confirmation. It's very basic, and here and there they'll teach you some like politically charged stuff, like as a refutation of what like the like the far left is kind of trying to push, like Roe v. Wade and like abortion type of stuff. But they never actually really taught any kind of creed, any kind of theology really, as far as I remember, and never really taught you any kind of like logical. You didn't teach you any kind of basic philosophy or logical arguments and stuff like that, like these things which are very common in Islam, logical proofs of the existence of God, stuff like that, Ghazali and these traditional Ash'ari Aqidah type of stuff. These things, none of that existed like in my upbringing. And so when I this first just like sledgehammer of atheism is just like boom, and it's hard to your mind is so undeveloped. I mean, there's no way you can really refute this with logic, and it's not like I've read the Bible much at all anyways. I can't really tell. I'm not like an expert in Bible exegesis or anything. So I mean, it hit me, and I was like, wow, and then I remember just reading this stuff, this atheistic stuff, and in the end, it just seemed very convincing. And I remember at one point, I decided to become an atheist, and I remember saying to myself out loud, I was like, something like, God doesn't exist and the Holy Spirit doesn't exist, or like God isn't real and the Holy Spirit isn't real. And interestingly enough, I remember right when I said that, I felt like some kind of like a drop inside of me, like this darkness plunge inside of me, like a physical, I could really feel like this physical effect of deciding upon atheism. It was like this growing darkness, and as soon as I said that and decided upon that, it just went like the full hit. And instantly I knew I was wrong. Even though logically I couldn't in any way argue against atheism at the time. But deep down though, like what we would even call your fitra in Arabic, like your primordial being, your natural disposition, God's kind of imprint on your soul when he created you. I knew deep down that it was just wrong. But I had no other way of expressing that, at least at the moment. And so I probably spent about a year or so as an atheist. And then I remember I was visiting my grandma, and she found out that I was an atheist. And I told her or something. And she took me in and sat me down. And she was very worried. And she, talking about it, she's like, so why are you an atheist? And I was like, I don't know, like it just doesn't, Christianity doesn't make any sense, it's not logical to me, or something like that. I was like, it just doesn't make any sense, I just don't think it's real, and then I don't remember everything that she said. She said something, she's like, okay. and she's always been very religious, and she said something like, okay, well, I remember at the end, I don't remember what she said, sorry, but I remember at the end, she did bring up my dad, and she was like, and I know as well that, as at the very end, she said a bunch of things, this is the one thing she said at the very end, and I remember by the end, my heart had softened up, and I was like, okay, yeah. I don't remember what she said, but it did soften my heart towards Christianity and towards God again. I felt myself kind of opening up, and honestly, just becoming humble again. It's like I had an arrogance, and she helped me to overcome that arrogance again, really. It's like atheism is almost like a form of arrogance, really. Looking back, it's very emotional as well. Atheism, it's presented as something very logical, at least in its modern form. It's supposed to be it acts like it's very rational, like, if only you had science, then you wouldn't be a Christian, or you wouldn't. In reality, though, it's actually very illogical. It's actually impossible as well. It's actually impossible for there not to be an unmovable, unmovable mover, right? As like, old philosophy was talking about Aristotle and stuff. It's very actually irrational. It's very illogical, and it's actually very emotional. It's really like an emotional argument more than an illogical argument. But they present it as a logical argument, and they'll defend it as a logical argument. But in reality, it's actually an emotional argument, and it's an emotional reaction to certain things. Like, it's emotional reaction, especially like in the Enlightenment era. I'd say it's probably really an emotional reaction to what at the time was the corruption of the Catholic Church, selling of indulgences, Reformation era type of stuff, owning like a third of the land of a lot of countries, endless wars, stuff like that. And so when my grandma was talking to me, and just, I just overcame this arrogance, and I just remember kind of opening up again and becoming kind of humble again. And I was like, yeah, I guess, it does make sense, And I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, I think maybe you're right. And at the very end, I remember she said, and if your dad knew about this, he'd be very upset. And I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, he probably would be, and I decided to be Christian again, So that was my dabble there with atheism. One thing too, though, was that at this point, my family had largely stopped kind of going to church. And so, but then I was nearing the age of 16, 17. And so once I could start driving again and stuff like that, then I could drive myself to church. I remember at some point briefly looking into Islam by reading like a Wikipedia article and perhaps some Google searches. The concept of another prophet coming actually made a lot of sense to me. But then I thought, if this are actually true, then the people of truth must be like super awesome, right? Perfect people, right? So now it's thought like, well, then why are Muslims doing all these things around the world? At least what I saw in the media, right? And so I just kind of cast it aside. I was like, there's no way. But I did have a moment where I was like, that actually makes sense. Perhaps if I were in a different situation, or even a different time period, and I, read about Islam, maybe I'd been more accepting of it at the moment. But the media had quite an impact on me growing up. There's movies like 24, or sorry, TV series like 24. There's all these like movies and stuff like that. That TV series 24, for example, has like this constant threat of terrorists, has like the superhero guy, which is in no way, in any way realistic about, how anti-terrorism works or anything like that, or intel. But anyways, super unrealistic TV show. But anyways, he like tortures people, where's the bomb, but for laymen, regular Americans watching these TV shows and all this media, consuming all this media, movies and TV and the news and so on. I mean, you're not educated in foreign policy or history or anything of that sort, and so when you consume this type of media, it gives you a certain, and I'm pretty sure it's all designed that way, but it gives you certain biases. It plays to certain, it's putting phobias in your mind. These people are bad, these people are good. It paints this black and white picture in your mind of the way the world is when it's not even remotely true or realistic, right? And there's all these internet hate websites and videos, and which are even just outright racist. And unfortunately, consuming that type of stuff, you'll wind up adopting some of their ideas, perhaps without even realizing that you're being, programmed in a way. And they call it internet programming, right? Kind of a bit of a pun there when they call it internet programming. Yeah, you have a program, and you're also programming your viewers. So this definitely had an impact on me. Another form of media that affected me a lot was video games. There's all kinds of different video games going on that kind of glorify the military, that paint, again, the towel-headed Arab terrorist guy with an AK in his hands, I'm talking about like Call of Duty, those types of video games. The war on terror just sparked a whole lot of media, TV, movies, video games, playing off it. Because after all, video game designers are going to make video games based on what's popular, what's getting everybody's attention, and the ability to, relive World War II and relive the Vietnam War, and also, play as a counter-terrorist unit, in some video game, Counter-Strike, and I can't think of other video games, but like all these different video games, is very appealing to people, especially the violence that's glorified, save the day, defuse the bomb, that stuff definitely has an impact on millions of people all over the world, really, and I'm no exception to that.